How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Today is Tuesday, May 14th. I got another great show planned for you guys today, starting off with another massive deal that hit the NFL 2 days ago now regarding the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and their safety, Antoine Winfield. I'll get into that first, plus a brewing sort of conflict, you could say, within the Philadelphia Eagles between their normal style of doing things and now with Vic Fangio coming in there, how he could try and shake things up with the amount of practice time they're having currently, as well as also later in the show talking about more on the Chicago Bears, and now this time moving the focus onto their wide receiver group and how their first round pick, Rome Odunze, can sort of carve out a role for himself in that Bears offense. What could that look like? Stick around and I'll tell you more about that. All of that is coming up on today's show. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And before I start on the first topic, as always, a reminder to you guys, if you have any questions or comments, to please use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, GSMCPodcast.net. By using that link, your question will pop up on my screen here. I could read it on air and that way get your guys' thoughts and perspective on anything that I say or on the topic at hand. It's a massive help for this show. So again, if you could, please use the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net, with any of your questions or comments. But like I mentioned before, we'll start off with another massive deal that hit the NFL recently. Antoine Winfield Jr. got that extension with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's been a while for this extension to kind of been brewing. Antoine Winfield was one of the two remaining players that was franchise tagged and that still hadn't received the deal. Michael Pittman received the deal, Josh Allen, Brian Burns. Even though some of them were traded and some stayed with their team, L'Jarius Sneed, another one, Antoine Winfield still remained with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, franchise tagged with the idea that the Buccaneers and Antoine Winfield were going to work out a long-term deal eventually. That day finally came. I talked about it before. I want to say it was about a month, almost a month since I last talked about ESPN's Adam Schefter reporting that a deal was close. More things had to be worked out since that point, but we finally got to this point, and the official new contract for Antoine Winfield is a 4-year, $84.1 million deal, which is the total value, and Antoine Winfield will receive $45 million guaranteed. If you do the quick math, that's about $21.025 million per year, making him the highest paid defensive back in the NFL currently. Why I mentioned the .025 is because that is the total difference between him and the second highest paid defensive back in the NFL, which is Jair Alexander. Small margins, people. We're talking about the smallest of margins here to make Antoine Winfield the highest paid defensive back, but that is what the situation is now. It's a massive deal, not only for Antoine Winfield, but it's sort of notable just because out of the top 6 highest paid defensive backs in the NFL, 5 of them were defensive backs. Jair Alexander, Denzel Ward, Jalen Ramsey. Those guys were some of the names up there, and the highest paid safety at the time was Derwin James. Now Antoine Winfield jumps in ahead of him and to the top of the list on top of all the defensive backs to earn the most money on an average yearly basis. I mentioned Derwin James was the highest paid. Before that, Minkah Fitzpatrick was also up there. Now he slides to third, Derwin's at second, and Antoine Winfield takes that number 1 spot. And Winfield, like I mentioned, I will get into it a little bit towards the end of this segment, but being one of the last 2 free agents or just players to get the franchise tag, the other one being T. Higgins. Now T. Higgins stands alone there as the only player to not receive a long-term extension. I'll get into that whole situation in just a second, but before this, on that franchise tag, Antoine Winfield was set to make about $17 million per year, or just on that 1-year franchise tag. And with Winfield only being 25, It would have been more of a prove-it year next year if he was to play good again and earn himself another long-term deal. But this is a massive win for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, not only because you get Antoine Winfield right as he, crazy enough to say, is just entering his prime years, still only 25 like I mentioned, and to get him on a massive 4-year deal, he's going to be there most likely the rest of his career, depending on how well he plays, avoiding injuries and whatnot. By the end of this contract, 29, 30 years old, then you can work out another deal. It's a great move for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, especially because just in simplest terms, he earned it, coming off of arguably his best season, 122 tackles, 12 passes defended, 3 interceptions, 4 fumble recoveries, 6 sacks, made the first team All-Pro this past season for the first time, and also this was sort of getting closer and closer to being dealt and getting done, similarly to yesterday with the Detroit Lions and Jared Goff. On Friday, Brad Holmes talked about it, how close they were, how he desired to figure out an extension for Amon-Ra, Penei Sewell back-to-back with Jared Goff. He alluded to it being close on Friday, and similarly, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, their general manager, Jason Licht, also talked about it last week on the Pat McAfee show briefly, and he basically pretty much said the same thing as Brad Holmes, and one thing he alluded to was, he said, he's the best safety in the league, he should be paid like it, and many people wouldn't take it so literally, but the Tampa Bay Buccaneers kept to their word, kept to their general manager's word, and now reward Antoine Winfield pretty nicely with this massive deal, and now, like I mentioned before, this was almost a month ago how the reports were sort of getting to a point where, oh, the deal was close. It's a lot harder to finally get it over the line than a lot of people think. But this is massive, not just for Winfield to get that reassurance, be paid very nicely for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers just to get one of their best playmakers back, but also you think about it whole picture-wise, they get Antoine Winfield back, Mike Evans back as well, 2 years, a 2-year deal, albeit, and also they get their starting quarterback back in Baker Mayfield. When you looked at their to-do list at the start of this offseason, you look at those 3 guys and you might be thinking to yourself, there might be a good chance that one of these guys, maybe a couple of these guys, wouldn't be able to come back, but the Tampa Bay Buccaneers made it happen, coming off of a division title as well, and doing pretty well in the playoffs for how well they started. This is a massive achievement for their front office, for them as a team, to continue on with this core group of players, to try and build off of what they did last year. And now, shifting back over to that topic I mentioned briefly just a few minutes ago, that leaves T. Higgins now, as the only player to be franchise tagged and not get a deal signed. Antoine Winfield, this deal, like I mentioned before, it was brewing. It was something that was coming for a long time now, and you could just see from when he was franchise tagged until now, almost 2 months passed before anything got done. T. Higgins has been on that sort of trajectory. That the only difference is that T. Higgins has requested a trade already. He wasn't really satisfied with the pace that the negotiations were going at. Currently, he requested a trade, but then a few weeks after that, he sort of gave in a little bit to accepting that he's just going to play with the Cincinnati Bengals now. Now, I'm curious, and you guys are free to also comment on this with the chat box. I'm curious now to see how he sort of responds to this. Not like Antoine Winfield doesn't deserve to be one of the highest paid players at his position. I think this was well deserved. A lot of people don't talk about Antoine Winfield, but the way people talk about T. Higgins and him also being 25, 24 years old currently, I think more attention is put on wide receivers and more of the spotlight goes on wide receivers for T. Higgins just to be sitting there like almost feeling ignored by his team with how important their wide receiver core is to Joe Burrow and how much success that they've had. To see a safety get paid before him and how his whole situation has just been dragged on even after he's requested a trade. I want to see how that develops and how T. Higgins talks about it. I'm sure he'll be asked about it in the next few days, weeks, the rest of the offseason if he again reassures that he wants to be traded he seemed pretty mild about it now, pretty tame about staying with the Cincinnati Bengals. But now I'm wondering if he'll be pretty annoyed that this happened, if or just how he'll respond to being the only player to be franchise tagged and not get a long term deal done. That is all going to play out the rest of the offseason, I'm sure, if the Bengals don't end up dealing him. They've given no inclination that they want to trade him, so how that dynamic breaks down will be something to monitor. But again, Antoine Winfield gets a much deserved contract extension with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to sort of continue on their quest to regaining the NFC North Championship. After the Atlanta Falcons got better, the Panthers got inevitably better. Might not be the toughest of competition, but they're getting better, and the Saints are there as well. The NFC South, something to keep an eye on, maybe a two-horse race there, but it will be entertaining nonetheless. But in the meantime, we will continue on with the show. We'll head into a quick break right now, and on the other side of it, I'll talk more about the Philadelphia Eagles bringing in Vic Fangio as their new defensive coordinator and how he wants to implement some new old-school ideas back into the Philadelphia Eagles. Plus, talking about the Chicago Bears once again, how they plan to implement their first-round pick, Rome Odunze, into their offense and how that wide receiver group will pan out in 2024. So stick with me. We're going to a quick break, and we'll be right back in just a few seconds.